Cuba has free education for all. If you are born outside of Cuba, you won't have access to education. Only in Cuba we have the best education system and free for all, no matter your skin color, no matter your status. Free education for all. That was the slogan of the revolution of the killer of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and Raúl Castro. That was the slogan. That's still the slogan today. However, number one, it's a lie. They always lie to us, telling us that only in Cuba people have access to free education. Outside of Cuba, nobody has access to education unless they pay for it. That's the first lie. Especially, he repeated over and over that if you had the disgrace of being born in the United States of America, the enemy, the imperialism, you would never have access to education unless you were rich. Only rich people had access to education. And God forbid, you were born black in the United States. Because black people, listen to me, black people in America, they cannot enter a school. That was Fidel Castro's lie during the more than 60 years of his dictatorship and kingdom in Cuba. However, we already know that that is a lie. And second, it is not true that you get free education in Cuba. It is free of money. But it comes with a really high price. Number one, you have to study and receive all the indoctrination they give you about their lie, about the revolution. Don't even dare to question anything about the system, about the regime, about the economy, about the laws. Don't you dare question anything. Because if you question anything, you're going against the revolution and you are going to lose your access to education, which is supposed to be for every single citizen. That's the number one thing. The number two thing is that if you get to graduate after you go through a whole set of rules, including that you have to get away from your family and you have to go to the countryside to boarding schools set by the revolution or by the dictatorship or by the regime. Call them however you want to call them. You have to go to the countryside, to these boarding schools, where, according to Marxism, it is good for men to mix studies and work. Of course, that was only for us, not for Fidel Castro and his family and his kids and his grandkids, not for any of the great commanders of the revolution and their families. They were very comfortably in their homes, in the best schools of the country. And you had to work half of the day for free and then study half of the day. Food was horrible, was awful. I was just telling my daughters the other day, actually it was yesterday, now with the protests that are going on in Cuba, I was telling my daughters, who are still children, how when I was in one of those boarding schools away from my family at the age of 14 or 15 years old, most of the times the food had worms and pieces of rock. The beans, the rice, they were not even clean because they have always treated us like animals. And I couldn't eat. And when I remember that at the age of only 14 years old, I couldn't even eat. I was away from my home, away from my parents, away from my family, in horrible conditions, in these huge rooms with like 40 or 50 bunk beds and only 4 or 5 bathrooms for each of those huge rooms or dormitories. It was like Auschwitz, honestly. Fidel Castro must have taken as example the concentration camps that they had for the Jews, because there's no other explanation. And why would he do that, impose that to every single Cuban family? But if you wanted to go to a university, you had to go through that. And you had to pay your contribution to the revolution. And the atrocities that happened in those boarding schools was awful. Children away, all of them belong to the state, just like they want to do here in America. Children away from their families, children away from their homes, living in horrible conditions. Many times we didn't have water. You had to have your own bucket and sometimes go all the way down from the third floor and grab your water, go upstairs, so you could at least take some type of a bath to be clean after you returned from working in the fields. The bathrooms, most of the times there was no water to flush and clean the bathrooms. So there were toilets full of you know what. Yes, full of poop to the top. And you had to find your way to try to not sit on them, but to squat with your legs, squat on the toilet. Do your need while holding your breath and get out of there as soon as possible. Not to mention, in the girls' dormitories, it was even worse. Imagine 60, 80 girls per dormitories with access to 5 bathrooms. No flushing water, no running water. Most of them menstruating at the same time. So just take a look at that scenario in your mind. How is that free? How is that even human? And we didn't have a say. Our parents didn't have a say, or at least they did not protest. They went with the flow. Be strong, my daughter, so you can go to a university and get a degree, so that you can do a little better with a degree. Once you get a degree, you have to pay back what they gave you for free. How do you pay back? Well, you have to work for them wherever they assign you, basically for free, with a very, very, very low salary, lower than the less than $20 a month people make in Cuba, for 5 years. That's what they call your social service. That's how you start paying to the revolution. Well, you have already been paying with what I described to you. And then after those first years, that's when you can apply to the different places or jobs. Everything belongs to the state, to the dictatorship. And then you can get a regular salary. With that salary, you don't even make a living. You cannot even afford to buy food. And that's for another video. How do Cubans survive? They cannot even buy food with their salary. So what happens when a doctor graduates and then cannot make a living? What happens when an engineer graduates, an architect, a biologist, and so on? They cannot make a living. They end up leaving their careers, becoming taxi drivers, becoming chefs, becoming barbers, hairstylists, anything. You name it, shoe repairer or shoemaker, because you make more money doing that than you make with a college education in the communist Cuba of Fidel Castro.